Blood spread across the light laminate flooring in a thin, warm streak, reaching the table leg, where the laptop's backlight still flickered. A chat window remained open on the screen with the phrase, "If you don't come, I'll tell you everything." The body lay unevenly, as if someone had tried to turn it but hadn't had the time. There was a handprint on the wall. The police duty shift responded to a call at 4:17 a.m. Downstairs, neighbors reported noise and objects falling. The apartment smelled of iron and damp dust. The kitchen light was on, the television was muted, and the screen was showing a Frozen commercial. A young woman lay on the floor near the sofa, her face partially obscured by her hair, her eyes open. Captain Simons leaned over and quietly said, "No pulse. There's pressure on her neck." Medics confirmed her death. She was about 20 years old, thin and wearing casual clothes. A student ID card with the name Aisha Noor was found in her shorts pocket. The police began an investigation. The door hadn't been forced open, and there were no signs of forced entry. 2 fingerprints were found on the handle, Aisha's and an unidentified man's. On the bedroom window was a shoe print with a distinctive sole pattern, typical of men's sneakers. The screen had been torn off, but there were no signs of escape. It appeared to have been pulled from the inside. A broken fingernail, presumably a woman's, was on the windowsill. A torn envelope was found in the trash can, containing scraps of printed photographs and a receipt from a liquor store the previous evening. Neighbors reported hearing a loud argument around midnight. A woman's voice shouted, "Go away." A man's voice responded quietly but forcefully. Then came a dull thud, the sound of an object falling, and a short scream. Then, silence. The entryway camera recorded nothing. The memory card had been removed. A neighbor on the 4th floor claimed to have seen a man near the building 2 days before the incident, waiting for someone at the entrance, leaning against a gray SUV with no license plates on the front bumper. Detectives found Aisha's phone on the floor by the coffee table. The last message was sent at 11:41 p.m. to someone named Daniel, with no contact photo. "I can't live like this anymore, let me go." There have been no incoming calls since then. Judging by the messages, she's known him for about 6 months. In their conversations, he mentions saving her from loneliness, calls her Little Princess, and frequently asks where she is. In the refrigerator were a half-finished bottle of white wine and 2 glasses. One stood by the sink, bearing a woman's fingerprints. The other was thoroughly washed. On the table was a box with wrapping paper, inside of which was an unsigned card and a crescent-shaped pendant. On the back was written, "So that you never forget me, wherever you are." On the wall by the desk hung a map of New York City with 3 addresses circled. It later emerged that these were the apartments where 2 other Pakistani women had previously lived, having gone missing in 2021 and 2022. The cases remained unsolved at the time, but now they shared similar details: a private encounter via instant messaging, meetings with an older man, and then a sudden disappearance. A roommate who returned home only that morning said Aisha had been living under stress for the past few weeks. She'd close her laptop when I came in. Sometimes she'd wake up in a panic, as if she were dreaming about the same person. She'd say, "He's everywhere." I thought it was just fatigue. They worked at the crime scene until dawn. Detective Simons noted in his report, everything appeared orderly, as if the scene had been cleaned up. However, signs of a struggle and blood indicate a sudden attack. The victim likely knew her attacker. She did not defend herself until it was too late. As the first light of morning peeked through the window, the duty officer looked up at the street. A woman in a coat stood behind the police tape, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth. "It's her, Aisha, that sweet girl from the cafe," she whispered. Her name was Jenny, a regular at the coffee shop where Aisha worked in the evenings. She said quietly, "A week ago, a man approached me and asked where she lived. He said he was a relative. I believed him." This detail would later become key in the investigation. Aisha met him in May behind the counter of a small cafe on 6th Street. He showed up on a rainy morning, tall, neat, and spoke softly, almost in a whisper. He ordered coffee without sugar and left a tip 5 times larger than expected. He returned a day later. A week later, he knew her name, even though she'd removed her badge after their first visit. His name was Daniel. He was about 40. He spoke simply without phrases like "sweetheart" or "pretty." He asked about her classes, her plans, and advised her to take care of yourself in this city. His politeness seemed genuine. A few weeks later, he began waiting for her at the exit after her shift, first with an umbrella, then with coffee. She didn't want to be rude, and allowed him to hang out for a couple of blocks. The conversations seemed harmless. Work, school, the weather. He told her he worked in investments and could help with my career. When she mentioned looking for an internship, he offered to look at my resume. That evening, he sent a message. "You deserve more. Send me the file. I'll help you fix it." He indeed did fix it, making it better. A week later, Aisha was invited to an online interview. She thanked him. He responded briefly, "You just needed someone who could see." Everything seemed like friendship. But starting in June, he started texting more often. "Where are you? Are you home yet? Don't go out alone tonight." He explained it as concern. When she didn't respond on time, he'd send a photo from the window of her cafe, captioned, "Checking to make sure everything's all right." At first, it was embarrassing, then alarming. He'd notice her clothes. "You can't wear that coat late at night. Why do you wear red lipstick to work?" She joked that he should open a security detail. He didn't smile. A month later, he brought a box of vitamins and an envelope of money. "Help until my scholarship." She refused, but he left the envelope by the door. The next day, he asked, "Did you take it?" "No, you're proud." Sometimes that gets in the way of survival. He spoke calmly, without threatening, and that only made things worse. In July, Aisha noticed he knew her schedule. "I just remember it," he explained. She saw a gray SUV parked near the house several times, but didn't connect it with him. That evening, returning from her shift, she received a text. "You're staying out too late. I see how hard it is for you." She stopped and looked around, but saw no one. He began interfering with her decisions. When she told him she wanted to move closer to college, he said, "I found an option. The owner is a friend of mine." She thanked him, but declined. He didn't press the matter, merely adding, "Not all offers are repeated." A day later, he sent a photo of a small studio and wrote, "If you don't rent it, someone else will." Since August, he'd stopped being just a conversationalist. He was controlling. Don't answer strangers. Don't go to the bar with coworkers. This city devours the naive. She tried to argue, but he met every objection with a calm confidence. "I just want you to live." His presence became constant. At work, a colleague noticed Aisha flinching at notifications. She muted her phone, but the messages kept coming. "Don't forget to sleep. Who's that guy from college? I saw you going the wrong way." Police would later determine that he'd installed a tracking app while helping her update her phone. In September, he showed up uninvited for the first time. He knocked holding a box of food. She only opened it because she was afraid of the noise. The landlady was strict about scandals. He entered confidently, placed the bags on the table, looked around the room and said, "You live too modestly." Then he slowly took out a crescent-shaped pendant and placed it around her neck. "You're protected now," he said. She stood motionless. When he left, the scent of his perfume lingered until morning. A few days later, Aisha tried to return the gifts. He met this with silence, and that evening, he sent her a photo of her entryway with the caption, "No need to double lock the door. I'm still here." She deleted the conversation, but the messages began coming from a different number. In the fall, she stopped going to the cafe. The manager said she was taking health leave. Her attendance at college dropped. Her classmates thought she had found a job. In reality, according to the investigation, Daniel persuaded her to transfer to an online format and temporarily stop wasting her energy on external activities. One evening, he said, "We're a team, and teams don't split into parts." By November, fear had become the norm. She stopped calling home, postponing conversations under the pretext of fatigue. In a text to her mother on November 20th, she wrote, "Everything's fine, just cold." It was her last sentence without a mistake, without fragments. A neighbor recalled seeing Aisha sitting on the floor at the end of the month, clutching her phone. She was crying silently, the woman said, just holding something like a chain. That night, a man's voice was heard in the stairwell, quiet, insistent, and hers, trembling, short. Then the door slammed. At this time, no one yet knew what exactly would follow. Winter brought cold and silence to the city. For Aisha, every day now began the same way. A short call from Daniel, a few questions, and a pause before he uttered the familiar, "You remember why I'm here, right? To protect you." The phrase sounded almost like a prayer. Her phone became an extension of his will. He texted her when she went out to the store, when she turned on her laptop, when she lingered in the shower for more than 5 minutes. At first, she answered out of politeness, then out of fear. In January, he insisted she change her number. "Your old one shows up in the databases. It's not safe." He bought a new SIM card himself, registered it under a different name, and said, let them think you're gone. She accepted without arguing. Soon, contact with Sarah, her only friend, was lost. Her mother's letters arrived, but she didn't respond promptly. At college, she increasingly showed up tired and distracted. Her professors remarked on the changes, but when they saw her, she smiled and said, "Just exhaustion." Daniel now visited her almost daily. He brought groceries, cleaned, checked the meters as if he lived there. One day he said, "You should rest, I'll take care of everything." He stood behind her while she wrote her term paper, correcting her mistakes. He once fixed her laptop by installing updates. After that, every email she sent appeared on her screen with a copy in his inbox, but she didn't know it. Aisha tried to maintain the semblance of normalcy. In the morning, she'd go to the library, sit by the window and open her notebook, but her thoughts wouldn't gather. More and more often, she caught herself looking at the door, as if expecting him to appear. Sometimes she actually saw him. Through the glass across the street, he'd be standing by the kiosk, drinking coffee, not approaching. That evening, she'd write, "I passed by today to make sure you were okay." In February, he started speaking differently. Not, "I'm worried," but, "You have to listen." He demanded a report on every call, asking who she was talking to. When she said the professor had invited her to discuss a project after class, he replied, "No meetings without me." Aisha noticed his tone had become harsher, but there was still something rational about it, as if his demands were logical. He explained, "People take advantage of people like you. I've seen it before." Gradually, fear began to displace logic. One night, Aisha was awakened by a noise on the landing. A shadow was visible through the crack under the door. There was no ringing of the doorbell, only a soft tapping. She didn't open it. In the morning, a paper bag with the words, "You forgot your lunch," lay on the rug. Inside was a container of rice and a note, "I'm here." She tried to find help, but didn't know where to start. She had nothing to explain to the police. He hadn't made any formal threats. Everything he said could be interpreted as concern. At college, the international student counselor suggested she talk if she was having trouble adjusting. She thanked him, but didn't go. That same evening, she received a text, "You smiled too much at someone today." A week later, she decided to delete the messenger. Daniel called immediately afterward. "Why aren't you answering?" She said she was tired of the phone. He replied quietly, "You have to understand that I lose my peace when I don't know where you are." His voice was almost gentle, but every word cut through the air. In March, he walked in uninvited for the first time. She didn't have time to close the door before he appeared with a bag of groceries. There was no anger on his face, only weariness. "I've been waiting at the entrance for 20 minutes, he said. "You haven't answered. I thought something happened to you." She stood there, clutching the phone to her chest, unsure what to say. He walked into the kitchen, put the bags down, and turned around. "Why are you afraid?" "I'm not afraid," she replied. "Okay, then don't make me feel like I'm worrying for nothing again." After he left, she stood by the window for a long time, then turned on the recorder on her phone. There was a slight tremor in the recorded voice. She said, "If anything happens to me, his name is Daniel. Tall, dark hair, drives a gray SUV." She tucked the recording into her notebook. By April, Aisha was practically never leaving the house. He said the city had become more dangerous. He made deliveries in his own name and checked the packages first. In the apartment, she heard only the sound of the refrigerator and his footsteps outside the door. When he didn't come home, she felt relief, but also a sense of guilt. She could no longer separate his voice from her own thoughts. On April 16th at 10:03 p.m., she texted her friend Sarah a short message. "You were right. He won't let me go." It was the last thing she sent anyone before the night of the crime. In the following days, the neighbor downstairs heard two people moving around the apartment. Their voices were muffled, the man's even, the woman's halting. One day she heard a sound like a blow, then the rustling of furniture. No one called the police. The building was old and the noises were familiar. But on the morning of June 14th, the smell of iron was noticeable in the hallway. When investigators later compared the dates, it turned out that Aisha had submitted an online application to change her address on April 16th. The document was saved, but not sent. It was found in the mailbox. The reason for moving field stated personal safety. By the end of April, the city had already begun to warm up, but Aisha's apartment was quiet and cold. She rarely turned on any lights, only a table lamp by the bed. In recent weeks, Daniel had come less frequently, but his presence was constant. His gloves lay in the kitchen, his razor by the mirror. He'd say, "I don't live here. I just want you to feel at peace." But the things kept multiplying. His scent permeated clothes, furniture, books. He began leaving on business, leaving her with instructions, what to buy, which letters not to open. Each time he left, it brought a brief moment of relief. During those hours, she felt alive. Then she could finally turn on her laptop without the fear of someone standing behind her. One such day, she decided to delete old files. Among the folders, she noticed a new one, Documents, DH. The name seemed strange. She hadn't created anything like it. Inside were dozens of images, women's faces. Some were blurry, others clear, taken indoors and on the streets of New York. All of them depicted young Asian women. Some of the photos were clearly taken without their knowledge. The files were dated back 2 years. The last photo was her own, taken on her phone, standing by the window in her own home. She paused, scrolling through the photos, then noticed the Profiles folder. It contained scanned copies of passports, student visas, and bank cards. The name in the document properties was Daniel Hale. Elsewhere, there was a license with the same photo, but in the name, Christopher Boyd. She opened a document dated 2020, a lease for an apartment on Brooklyn Avenue signed by the same man. The address matched the one she'd once seen on an envelope he'd held. Aisha closed the laptop, but her hands were shaking. She turned it on again to make sure she hadn't made a mistake. A message flashed on the screen. System update completed. Remote access enabled. She realized the laptop was no longer hers. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She pulled her old phone out of the drawer, the one she left with her previous number. There was no service, and the SIM card was inactive. She turned on the Wi-Fi to email Sarah, but immediately received a notification. Unauthorized login from new device. A few seconds later, a message from Daniel. Why are you digging through something that doesn't belong to you? She dropped her phone and sat down on the floor. No one knocked on the door, but she felt him nearby. Her breath caught in her throat and her chest burned. Then a second message arrived. I told you to let the past go. Don't make me do anything stupid. That same night, she packed a backpack, documents, some cash, spare keys, and an old flash drive. She left the house around 3 in the morning. The street was empty. She reached the 2nd Avenue station, but on the platform, she noticed a man in a long coat. His back was to her, but his posture, his gait, everything was reminiscent of him. Aisha walked back up the street, hid behind a newsstand, and called Sarah from someone else's phone. Her voice trembled. If anything happens to me, his name is Daniel. Find the entry in the laptop. The connection was lost. The next morning, she returned home. The lock hadn't been forced, but the doormat had been altered. Inside, it smelled of the perfume he wore. In the kitchen, there was a box. Inside was her flash drive, neatly tied with ribbon, and a note. You tried to escape. Don't do it again. She tried to call the police, but stopped. Explaining what was happening seemed impossible. He hadn't made any formal threats. It all seemed like an incomprehensible personal drama. 2 days later, a professor approached her at college and told her that her husband had called to check if she had received her course materials. She turned pale and replied, I don't have a husband. The professor thought he had misheard. That evening, Aisha opened her laptop again. A new icon appeared on the desktop, a folder called Trust. Inside was only one video. She pressed play. On the screen was a camera of her apartment. She was sitting at her desk, working. Then Daniel walked into the frame, put his hand on her shoulder, and said something. She didn't remember anyone filming. At that moment, she realized the apartment was under surveillance. The camera could be anywhere, in a lamp, in a smoke detector, in a laptop. She jumped up, started rummaging through her things, turned off the light, removed the light bulb, turned over the clock. But no matter how many times she checked, she couldn't find the source. At 1:48 a.m. that night, I received a message. I warned you that trust is the foundation. You destroyed everything. Now, you will always be by my side. After that, she never came out again. The neighbor downstairs heard someone slam the closet door at 3 in the morning, followed by a short scream. In the morning, the door was closed. The investigation would later establish that during this period, Aisha attempted to send a letter to the Pakistani embassy requesting protection, but the document never arrived. It remained in draft form on her computer. The last edited file was dated June 10th. It contained only one line, he is not who he claims to be. By that time, Daniel had already rented a new number in the Bronx under a different name. Neighbors recalled him as always polite, but rarely out during the day. His car was seen near Aisha's house on the night of June the 13th, 2014. Surveillance cameras were not working. 2 days later, her body was found in the living room, and on her hand, was the same crescent-shaped pendant. The investigation began on the morning of June 14th. Detective Simons was the first to enter the apartment after the forensics team. The entire scene seemed orchestrated, as if someone had intended to create the impression of a casual argument, but too many things didn't match. Footprints on the floor led toward the entrance, fingerprints on the pen were smudged, and the laptop's password had been changed just hours before Aisha's death. Neighbors reported seeing a gray SUV parked outside the building around midnight, without license plates. The entrance security cameras were out of order, as before. Police quickly connected Daniel Hale with the victim. His number was in the victim's recent calls log, and photos of him were found in Aisha's cloud storage. A college inquiry revealed that the man had called the administration several times, posing as a guardian, asking for her schedule and address. Staff described him as polite, but persistent. 3 days later, a search warrant was obtained for Hale's Bronx apartment. Inside, there was minimal furniture, clean walls, a single laptop, and neatly folded documents. In the kitchen was a tightly sealed box, sealed with duct tape. Inside were 10 flash drives and 2 memory cards. The drives contained hundreds of photographs of young women, international students, mostly from Asia and the Middle East. Among them was Aisha. Some of the photos were dated 2 years before they met. One of the files contained a hidden camera video, a woman in the kitchen, the sound of footsteps behind her, and a brief conversation. The recording ended abruptly. Based on the clothing and interior, police determined that the video was taken in the apartment where an Indonesian student went missing in 2021. The case was then ruled a disappearance without a trace. Investigators also found several ID cards with different names: Christopher Boyd, Ethan Hall, and Daniel H. Hale. All the photographs matched. Each document had different dates of birth and states of registration. Forensic analysis showed that the fingerprints belonged to the same person. Police issued a federal manhunt. The gray SUV was found on June 18th in a motel parking lot in New Jersey. When officers arrived, the license plates had already been replaced, and Daniel was attempting to drive away. He was detained without resistance. A laptop and a box of hard drives were found inside. One of the drives contained the same video file as the one on Aisha's flash drive, only longer. The final seconds showed him standing by the window, followed by the sound of a door and the rustling of clothing. During interrogation, he didn't deny knowing her. He said, "I was just looking out for her. I didn't harm anyone." When asked about the recordings, he replied, "They're an archive. People always leave if they're not preserved." His demeanor remained calm, showing no signs of remorse. A police psychologist later noted that he referred to the girls in the plural as a project. The investigation lasted nearly a year. At trial, prosecutors presented 27 pieces of evidence: photographs, audio recordings, bank statements, showing him transferring small sums to the missing girls' accounts, feigning support. It emerged that his pattern was repetitive: meeting through public places, guardianship, addiction, and then disappearance. Aisha's case was a turning point. She was the first to record his name and leave a recording describing his appearance. One of the hidden audio files on her phone contained a short phrase spoken 2 days before his death: "You can't decide for me. I don't decide. I just remove the choices that are harmful to you." This recording became key evidence of premeditation. In February 2024, Daniel Hale was found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life without parole. He didn't look at the judge at the hearing. When the verdict was read, he said, "She wanted me to stay with her. I just did as she asked." Aisha was buried in New York. At the family's request, her body was not moved. Several of her classmates, teachers, and the local imam attended the ceremony. A friend, Sarah, told reporters, "She tried to live a good life, but was simply subjected to someone else's will. Now her name is known, so she didn't disappear in vain." After the case was closed, police reopened investigations into previous disappearances of foreign students. 2 of them were confirmed as linked to Hale. A file titled "Future" was found at the bottom of one of the hard drives. Inside was a list of dates and names. The first line read, "June 2023, Aisha Noor." The next line was blank. Detective Simons later said in a report, he didn't pick randomly. He picked people who were too far from home for anyone to come looking for right away. Nothing was left in Aisha's apartment after the investigation. A college representative came to collect her belongings. A crescent moon pendant, the very one she had been wearing in recent weeks, lay on the table. It wasn't seized as evidence. There was no evidence there. The cleaning workers said they left the pendant on the windowsill. A few days later, it disappeared. The case file contains the last photograph of the apartment. The morning after the examination, light from the window falls on an empty table, and the mark of an overturned chair is still visible on the floor. In the corner is an open box of textbooks. The top page labeled Final Project, Human Behavior and Control. The document is closed. The case is classified as closed. But the forensic psychiatrist's report contains a phrase that is cited in forensic science training materials. Control begins not with a threat, but with a care that knows no bounds. This is the phrase that ends the folder. Case number 23-611, Noor Aisha.